And before this video begins, I'd like to give a special shout out to my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Name of the Doctor. The mere mention of this Doctor Who finale might propel you into fight or flight mode. Why? Well, until 2018, this was pretty much the worst Doctor Who finale of the modern era. A complete mess of an episode seeing the Doctor arrive at his own grave, with the Great Intelligence trying to yeet himself into the Doctor's time stream and kill him during every adventure, or something. And oh yeah, River Song is there too, I guess. Name of the Doctor was Moffat's attempt to both answer the mystery of the Impossible Girl story arc, whilst also segueing into the big 50th anniversary epic, The Day of the Doctor. However, instead, it completely bombs and feels like a confusing waste of time, instead of this amazing prelude. But why? What exactly goes so wrong with Name of the Doctor? Why is it such a derided finale to an already unpopular series of the show? Well, that's what we're going to find out in today's edition of I am trapped in a never-ending cycle of only being able to review Doctor Who, and my mental sanity is hanging on by a thread.
For you, pain everlasting.
For some reason, Series 7 of Doctor Who has an obsession with the Paternoster Gang showing up everywhere, despite them being about as interesting as a damp piece of toilet paper thrown up on the ceiling. So, naturally, Name of the Doctor opens up with the world's most boring alien hunting trio mulling over the prophecy of Jim the Ripper over here, babbling on about the Doctor's secrets and his grave. So, how did this random criminal learn all this very specific information? Well, the villainous Whispermen paid him a visit, of course, in a random prequel. No idea why they need old Clarence over here to carry the message when the same Whispermen later just go to the Paternoster Gang directly. If they wanted a mysterious scene of a crazy man losing his sanity, then they should have just held up a mirror to me watching this episode. At least it gives us this absolute Oscar-worthy piece of dialogue by Jenny.
We can't let that terrible man live.
Wow, fantastic. Hey, at least she still got her award for Best Door Locker 1892.
Someone's broken in.
Oh, actually, yeah, maybe not.
I think I've been murdered.
Although I do have to admit I like the scene of Strax getting into a bar fight in Scotland. It's probably the only genuinely funny scene involving Strax as part of the group, since most of the time his comedic moments are painfully unfunny and excessive. This is just a fun throwaway moment of the war-obsessed Sontaran hitting up a Scottish bar and obviously riling up the locals, because you know what the Scottish people are like. Hey, it's not offensive, this is written by a Scot. The Paternoster Gang then decide to take drugs and hang out in a time and space Zoom call. To be fair, it's the 1800s. Rotting your brain with opium was tamer than spinning yourself around 10 times and trying to score a football penalty. The opioid party even extends into the far future, as Clara receives a letter in the middle of her attempts at making a souffle. Yeah, get it? Because of the souffle aspect of Asylum of the Daleks? No wonder Strax was carrying around a shovel. It's representative of Moffat beating you over the head that Clara has appeared before. Hey, wait a second, could you tell me again, Grand Moff? I think it's still a little bit too subtle for me. I might need a brick smashed into my skull this time. Clara then wakes up in the interdimensional DMT party and is immediately flooded with exposition. Because that's always what you want, isn't it? Stuck in a dream palace off your tits drinking tea with a lizard woman and a sentient potato, and they won't stop banging on about being able to time travel in dreams. I think I'd rather prefer my childhood nightmare of being chased around a medieval castle by a green guy named Peeps the Peeve. And to make things even worse, River Song shows up and straight away starts hitting the bubbly. Yeah, I can't blame you there. It's just a shame I can't get rid of River no matter how much alcohol I try to consume. Yes, for some godforsaken reason, Moffat decided it would be a great idea to bring back his highly flanderized, characterless version of River Song. Whoop-dee-doo. The Whisper narcs bust into the dream to arrest everyone, and then the Great Intelligence pops onto the screen to say toodaloo and do a funny rhyme. Guess they should have used a VPN for this dream, because it was about as secure as your mum's legs after a £5 note and half a Jack Daniels. The whole dream conference call feels so stupid and contrived. All it's there for is a shed load of exposition and enigmatic phrases. There is no point to it. Moffat had to find a way to introduce all of the characters to the plot except the Doctor himself. But the problem is all these characters are from different times, and also the fact that Clara tells the Doctor everything immediately after, which renders the whole secrecy aspect completely pointless. So rather than, having the Doctor and Clara in Victorian times with the Paternoster gang, and keeping River uninvolved until Trenzalore, Moffat creates a whole elaborate dream sequence. I guess this was just him still clinging to his original 50th anniversary plan of making the modern Doctors just a dream the Doctor was having about the possible future if he ends the Time War. Because what better way to celebrate Doctor Who than completely retconning almost 8 entire years of the show? So I think I'll take the crazy opioid dream sequence after all. The Doctor and Clara soon arrive on the mysterious planet Trenzalore, which had been ominously hinted at back in the Wedding of River song, indicating this inevitable future the Doctor is marching towards despite all his attempts to escape this path. Even at the start of this episode, there's a fantastic moment as Eleven realises he now has to go to Trenzalore. He's always had his suspicions about what it is and why he should never go there, but it would have always been something distant for him, a responsibility he could push to the side. Now, however, he's faced with the reality of it all, and Matt Smith shows the emotion really well. You can see how the Doctor is struggling with this revelation, since it almost knocks him off his feet in a way. The score here is really effective, punctuating the melancholic feeling of the moment. The Doctor now knows he's buried at Trenzalore. That's where his journey ends someday. It's impossible to imagine this wonderful, impossible character ever having a grave, but like he says,
because we all do somewhere out there in the future, waiting for us.
It reminds you of how fallible the Doctor is. He has to die one day too. His regenerations can't keep going forever. Regardless of how the concept is ultimately wasted, this scene is really strong and shows a very emotional side of the Doctor. I think Trenzalore looks absolutely incredible as the final resting place. It's this giant wasteland filled with the graves of thousands who died in war, a landscape capped off by the daunting visual of a giant, derelict TARDIS towering above. It's a truly inspired sight to behold. It dominates the skyline, not a monument like we initially think, but actually the TARDIS itself, abandoned and dying so it's swollen and grown to this huge size. This is a tragedy in itself, the deterioration of such a staple of the show, something seen as so magical and safe, but now it's nothing but a corpse. A shell entombing the Doctor's time stream, and the console room overgrown with nature running wild. It really reminds you of the symbiotic relationship between the Doctor and the TARDIS. They can't survive without each other, so losing the Time Lord basically destroys the TARDIS. It does its best Padme impression and dies of a broken heart. It's a wonderfully cruel twist of irony that the Doctor, such an advocate for peace and diplomacy, ends up buried in the middle of a battleground, taking thousands of others with him. It's the last way the character would ever want to die, especially in the much more pacifist modern incarnations. It continues to drive home the harsh reality of this all. It's not a fitting or convenient resting place. It's so imperfect and undoctor-like that it makes it so powerful, especially with the amazing score that accompanies the first look at Trenzalore. One of the many graves on the battlefield is River Songs, who somehow kept the conference call link open so she can communicate with Clara. God knows how. This means River just kind of hangs around the episode as a ghostly spectre, especially because she's from the last point in her timeline, the digital copy of the River we met in the library. She's such a strange aspect to the episode, since there are all these moments where she tells Clara what to say, basically removing the actual companion's agency and ability to talk for herself. Instead, it's just River talking through Clara for absolutely no reason, and making her say the most obvious things any companion would already be saying. Although I do like how River's grave is purposefully fake and out of place as a secret entrance to the tomb. It's a good use of her and the Doctor's relationship, since only he would know it's not a real grave. This in turn leads to a nice sequence of the Doctor and Clara ascending the giant, barely recognisable TARDIS, and the companion having recollections of Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS, which had obviously been wiped from her mind at the end of that episode. It's great to see the consequences of that narrative, Clara remembering the Doctor's speech about meeting her before. It's a great way to bring that episode into the spotlight and make it more important than it initially seemed.
What do you mean you keep meeting me? You said I died. How could I die?
That is not a conversation you should even remember.
What do you mean I died?
The main villain of The Name of the Doctor is the Great Intelligence, who had previously returned in the Bells of St. John, still a little bit angry about being killed before. I don't know, I think he's overreacting a bit. The reason Moffat brought the Great Intelligence back again is because the villain represented both eras of Doctor Who, so the appearance in Name of the Doctor is a good way to celebrate the show ahead of the 50th anniversary. I loved Richard E. Grant in The Snowman, so his return in this episode is much appreciated. He does an incredible job yet again. I really like the speech the villain gives about how blood-soaked the Doctor actually is. It's fascinating to see this character from a villain's perspective. We know the Doctor as a good guy, always trying to do the right thing, but the truth is, he has killed a lot. He always justifies his reasons, but those lives are still taken, and it shows a great new side of the universe. It's similar to the Alliance in the Series 5 finale or the Silence in Series 6. These villains offering a brand new look at the heroic Doctor by seeking vengeance for all the deaths he has caused.
The Doctor lives his life in darker hues, day upon day.
Much like Series 7A, it introduces that darker side of the protagonist, playing with more morally grey characteristics as a way to explore the character. The Great Intelligence is good foil for this, especially because Grant and Smith have such amazing chemistry when they share the screen, and make both these characters so incredibly believable. Even though Grant is once again wasted in this episode, I absolutely adore the shot of the Great Intelligence revealing that Simeon is just a shell of a being he inhabits. There's no actual Simeon left, just his face being puppeted. It's an amazing visual, this completely hollow person with no actual identity anymore. It's just a shame the Great Intelligence just stands around making threats the whole episode and doesn't really do much. He's not really much of a presence. This is also in part due to the introduction of his henchmen, the Whispermen, who Moffat introduced to avoid dwelling on the past too much. These guys look like Slender Man raided a local funeral home, and they're about as threatening as someone dressed as a mummy at a Halloween party. Some of them even straight up look like handsome Squidward. They just have no real menace to them. They look goofy as all hell and spend the majority of the story just walking slowly after the protagonist, whispering rhymes about the characters and the events. Why should we be afraid of these monsters? Sure, it's cool that they're impervious to damage and can assume the form of Simeon, but there's no depth to them. They're featureless henchmen filling in a basic narrative requirement, and that's all there is. The Whispermen are almost literally blank canvases. They don't feel fleshed out like the Yeti or even the Snowmen from the Christmas special. Remember that big moment of Jenny, a core character, dying to show the threat of the Whispermen and how her death was basically a statement of intent by the Great Intelligence? Yeah, well, Strax waves a BP device over her and instantly brings her back to life. Ah, the old Moffat special. He'd still find a way to resurrect a dead character if all their limbs were chopped off one by one and dumped in a bathtub full of acid. So this means the Whispermen kill exactly 0 people. Wow, so threatening there, such great monsters. The Great Intelligence tends to be personified by its henchmen, so the Whispermen needed to be memorable and intimidating to fit their status and association with the Intelligence, but they're not. I'd even take a non-imposing fluffy Yeti over the Whispermen, because at least you remember them. For some reason, the Doctor's tomb can only be opened by uttering his name, hence the title of the episode. I'm not sure who exactly decided this should be the only way to open it, but it would have been cool to somehow tie a whole plot element of his name being needed to bring the Time Lords back in time with the Doctor. And speaking of, how come there's no truth field here anymore? The episode would end pretty quickly otherwise, the Doctor would sing like a canary. Although whilst we're on the topic of Time of the Doctor, a lot of people seem to get confused about the state of Trenzalore in this episode, since Time of the Doctor ends very triumphantly without the Doctor's death and with the planet still intact. But it's as simple as this version of Trenzalore being a possible future. This episode operates under the assumption that the Doctor never succeeded at Trenzalore, so the battle to keep his silence waged on and on until it destroyed the planet and he died of old age, since the Time Lords weren't able to give him more regenerations. To the Doctor and Clara, that all hasn't happened yet, so the future can still be influenced, and that's why the grave is here, despite the events eventually changing. Sure, you would think the Doctor's death and grave would be a fixed point in time, but this episode never explicitly states that. So thanks to the events of Time of the Doctor, this never actually becomes his grave. This whole setting is averted. When the Doctor does eventually die, it won't be on Trenzalore anymore, which a lot of people seem to misunderstand. Pretty much the only reason River is part of this episode is to serve as a cheap get out of jail free card so the Doctor doesn't actually have to say his name and open his tomb, because she does it for him. What a cop out. Moffat was always obsessed with referencing the Doctor's real name, and he seemed to get off on writing every other character knowing the name except the audience. So River just says it for him. It also turns out that the Doctor has been able to see and hear River this entire time, which is great since it allows him to stop a serious domestic abuse moment. I really don't understand this scene between the couple. It's Moffat's way of doing some hugely poetic epilogue for Eleven and River, but how are they even interacting if River was only connected to Clara, who is now no longer there? It really sucks as a scene and feels completely out of place. Why did River have to be in this episode to begin with, outside of Moffat wanting to play with his favourite toy? The scene even acknowledges that it makes no sense, only to promptly tell the rational members of the audience to do one because poetic romance.
If she's really dead, then how can I still be here?
Oh yeah, and the scene means the Doctor just starts making out with thin air, making this the most relatable moment for any Doctor Who fan. So, what does the Great Intelligence want? After all these years of careful planning and this whole elaborate scheme of bringing the Doctor and his friends to Trenzalore, what does the Intelligence want from it all? Well, apparently he wants to jump in the Doctor's time stream and undo every victory the Time Lord has ever achieved, erasing the Doctor's past, because that can happen, apparently. Not sure what the Great Intelligence would stand to gain from this, because he would just die and enough fixed points would be obliterated to end up destroying the universe. I mean, look at how many star systems go out. I guess he's just really salty. That's one hell of a grudge. However, one element of this over-the-top plan I do appreciate is the effect it has on the Paternoster gang. Without the Doctor there to set Strax on his journey of penance, the Centauran has now completely forgotten his friendship with Vastra, causing the two to fight as Jenny disappears entirely and Strax ends up getting disintegrated. It's a good way to show the consequences of the Doctor's past being undone, reminding you of just how influential the character has been. So in order to save the Doctor, Clara risks everything by jumping into the time stream herself so that she can defeat the Great Intelligence and maintain the status quo. This was pretty much solely because Moffat wanted to include a bunch of clips from the show's past as a celebration, leading to this montage of Clara being awkwardly edited into existing Classic Who clips. It's very dynamic and thrilling, showcasing the sheer history of Doctor Who, but it's also quite goofy because the clips are so weirdly stitched together. There's no sign of the Great Intelligence, it's just Clara standing there every now and then, shouting for the Doctor. Because I guess that really helps somehow. In typical Moffat fashion, the scene is all style, no substance. Although I have to admit, I like the cheeky callback to the "I don't know where I am" phrase from the Bells of St. John. That was pretty clever.
I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am.
However, I do think the sequence offers a good solution to the mystery of previous Claras. Throughout Series 7, the Doctor is obsessed with the impossible encounters with a woman twice dead. However, Name of the Doctor reveals that these were all just echoes of the actual Clara, deposited into the Doctor's timeline to protect him, the Time Lord only occasionally noticing her. I like this explanation, because it still maintains Clara's nature as a normal woman. Instead of this being some kind of innate destiny, it's her decision as a regular, relatable person. It's no different to Rose becoming the bad wolf entity or Donna becoming the Dr. Donna. It's a conscious choice made by a heroic yet completely normal person. It shows how far Clara has come as a person and how much she has come to value the Doctor, now willing to risk her entire life to keep him alive. Regardless of the outcome, I think it's a truly beautiful sacrifice by the companion. This acceptance of her inevitable death and willingness to do whatever she needs to do because it's the right thing. Clara has always been shown as this kind of person, putting the needs of others above her own because she's so selfless. Although I don't really like the reveal that she was the reason the Doctor stole the specific TARDIS we've become used to. It's a bit much. It is interesting though how this time stream element is almost like a bootstrap paradox, since the Doctor's previous mentions of Clara echoes inspire Clara to realise it's her job to make it happen.
But this is what I've already done. You've already seen me do it.
The existence of the Clara echoes create themselves, which is so very Moffat-y. But in typical Moffat fashion, he doesn't really know how to resolve all this. So River Song says something poetic, the Doctor says something poetic back, and then he jumps in to save Clara. That's all there is.
Just this once. Just for the hell of it. Let me save you.
Yes, the Doctor saves Clara through the symbolic use of a leaf. Because, get it? She credits a leaf for her existence? But then the entire episode screeches to a halt for the big hook ending, which is the surprise appearance of John Hurt as the War Doctor, a brand new incarnation of the character created purely for the 50th anniversary special. It's a huge reveal that instantly takes you off guard, especially because the entire Impossible Girl sequence is almost specifically designed to make you think you already know everything about the Doctor's life. Every Doctor is represented, and there are clips from episodes almost taking you on a journey through his entire timeline. As the viewer, you think you have it all worked out and nothing can surprise you anymore. So for this revelation to charge in and knock you off guard is really strong and effective. You no longer know the Doctor in the way you thought you did. He becomes a mystery and a stranger again. It immediately makes you want to ask so many questions. Who is this guy? Why wasn't he in the time stream flashbacks? And most importantly, why does Eleven hate him so much?
I said he was me. I never said he was the Doctor.
It perfectly sets up the War Doctor's inclusion in the anniversary special and creates a lot of intrigue surrounding him. We're thrown completely for a loop and the episode leaves you on this huge cliffhanger. But this strength is also Name of the Doctor's biggest and most infuriating weakness. The ending of this episode has always annoyed me immensely because, well, there isn't one. After the introduction of the War Doctor, the episode just ends. It cuts off without ever seeing how the Doctor and Clara escape the time stream or how everyone gets home. It ends so suddenly and anticlimactically. Too focused on this reveal to the extent it completely forgets there's a story to be resolved here. It's so disappointing and frustrating, like being kicked out of a restaurant halfway through your meal. There's no great epic confrontation between the Doctor and the Great Intelligence to definitively end this rivalry. It just stops. And it's not even like the cliffhanger is immediately resolved in Day of the Doctor. That just completely ignores all the events of Name 2, which is baffling. Originally, Name of the Doctor would climax with the Doctor not actually entering the time stream to save Clara, because she'd return on her own, only to start screaming about knowing who the Doctor really is. This, in turn, would convince him to enter the rift to return to the Time War, thus leading into Day of the Doctor. This original ending is similarly anticlimactic, but it at least connects directly. The complete lack of a conclusion has always been my biggest issue with Name of the Doctor. It's so amateur and unfulfilling.
I never saw that one. I saw all of you.
The Name of the Doctor is one of the worst finales in Doctor Who history. It's barely even a finale, since it doesn't feel conclusive or final enough. Sure, the Impossible Girl resolution is interesting and satisfying, wrapping up that narrative, but it really doesn't feel like the episode is truly paying off themes and ongoing plot threads, since it's just set up for the next two specials. The ending is non-existent, since there's no actual resolution to the events of the episode. The War Doctor cliffhanger may be good, but it also stops there being any kind of epilogue or proper ending. In terms of the villains, the Great Intelligence is once again wasted, spending the entire episode standing around making vague threats without really doing anything, and then he's defeated off screen. His Whispermen henchmen are unimposing and the constant rhyming is more cringeworthy than intimidating. They're just boring and unnecessary, like the Paternoster gang, who feel out of place in the narrative. It's the same with River Song too. She doesn't really do anything apart from hijack the story, and she personifies the sickeningly Moffat-y and desperately poetic writing. I'm going to give Name of the Doctor an E ranking on the Series 7B tier list. It's a complete waste of time, but there are a couple of upsides to it, like the music, with the episode scored very well by Murray Gold. The setting of Trenzalore is daunting and looks incredible, serving as an excellent backdrop to the narrative, and the performances of Richard E. Grant, Matt Smith, and Jenna Coleman are very strong. There are undeniably good moments in Name of the Doctor, like the scene of Clara in the time stream. Despite being terribly dated, it's a thrilling climax, paying homage to the long history of the show. But as a whole, Name of the Doctor is just a huge disappointment and an infuriating mess. It's literally not even a series finale, since that's basically what Time of the Doctor is. And I guess it's now time for those 2 specials. At least I'm finally done with this episode. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patron, Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Golk Nogler, Herna Versog, and Luke_SY. Thank you so much for your support.